I want to quickly talk about the basic structure of an ASP.NET MVC app, and specifically inside of Visual Studio you get some default MVC structure for your web application. Notice there's a folder in here called M or models, a folder in here for views, and a folder in here for controllers. And that's the MVC part of MVC. You have models and views and controllers. I'm going to start out by giving you, I think, just a basic, fairly simplified explanation of what I think of MVC when I use it. When I think of views, I tend to think of web pages. These are HTML pages that you would traditionally see for a website. If somebody said open up your home page or your home view, I would make those things equivalent in my head. If somebody said open up your account view, I'm going to open up my account web page. If somebody said open up my index view, I would open up my index web page, and those pages would live under my views. Now, those aren't to be confused with models. Models I tend to think of as data or structures for data. This is data that I might pass between my controllers and my view. And again, we'll get to controllers here in a second. But I'm going to store specific classes in here that define the types of data that I'm going to send between my controllers and my view. And my controllers is what I think of as my traditional code behind, or my traditional C# or server-side coding. No HTML will probably be in these controllers. It isn't a place for CSS or JavaScript or HTML. It's a place for my C#. So I'm going to start off with creating a new controller. And I'm going to wait for Visual Studio here for a second. I'm going to add a new controller. And I like to start off with this MVC5 controller, and it's just an empty one. And I'll click Add. I'm going to call it Home instead of Default. Wait for it to scaffold out a controller. And this is the basic definition of a controller. A lot of it starts out with an index method, and it's just a class, right? Here's a home controller class, and it has a function in it called index, and it returns something called an action result. And this is what a controller method will look like, just at its simplest. And then it returns to the view. Now, without a model, this code would work right here. It would just return to a view, and I can create a view for this index page. So I'm going to right click on here, and I'm going to click Add View, and I'm going to just call it Index, and I'm just going to create an empty one, just fairly scaffold out. And remember what a view is. A view is the web page. So you'll see a lot of HTML markup. And I'm going to take a lot of this out just to kind of simplify it. But this looks like a fairly traditional HTML page. When people say view, I tend to think of HTML. When people say controllers, well, this is C# code with a function inside of it. And so now I have a controller over here on the far right. I have a controller in my home controller. I have a home index view that's associated with that controller. Notice there's an index method on my controller, and I have an index view in my under this home folder. If I were to create another controller, I'll create another blank one, an MVC5 controller. I'm going to click Add. I'm going to call it Cars controller, or maybe Car controller. It's the same thing. Scaffolds out a fairly basic class, it has a default index function, and it returns a view. I can do the same thing. I'm going to right click on index. I'm going to say add a view, and I'm going to click add. And what it does is it creates a car folder and puts my index view in there. I'm just going to clean up the HTML a little bit and just to simplify it. And this is just a web page. It's an index page, just like the other index page. They're in two different folders. That's why they can exist separately but be called the same thing. And I have two controllers. This car controller goes with this car index page. This home controller goes with the home index page. I'm going to go into the home controller, and I'm going to add a brand new, another controller function. I'm going to add it public. I'm going to say it returns an action result, and I'm going to call it Steve. And it's underlined here because it doesn't return anything. So I need to say just return back to the view. Just return to the view. And I'm not sending anything to that view. I'm just saying go to the view. And what is the view? I'm going to right click on Steve. I'm going to click add view. And I'm going to click add. You'll notice over here in the home folder, it added not only an index page, but a Steve page. I'm going to clean up the HTML on the Steve page just to simplify it. But you can see for every function in our home controller, we're going to get a view under the associated folder, meaning I have two functions, index and Steve, in my home controller. And notice I have two pages, index and Steve, in my home folder under my views. These here are my views. They are the HTML pages. These here are my controllers. We haven't talked about models yet, but I have these functions that return to the view. If I were to run this, I'm going to go to the index page and I'm going to type in the word test in here. Or actually, yeah, test. And in this Steve one, I'm going to type in Steve. And I'm going to just run the... I think we'll just run this one here. No, that one's the car one. So we'll run this one here. And I'm waiting for Visual Studio to build it. And then I'm waiting for Visual Studio to build it. And then it starts to launch it. And here's our page. It's the home controller, the index method. If I have a car controller with an index method, and I know I do, it's going to go to that page. And that page is over here, I think, and I'll just put in the word car in it so we can see it. Refresh this page. Car controller index view, or index function. Remember, every function inside of my controller has this associated view with it. So I have a home controller. It has two methods in it, index and Steve. I have over here on the far right, I have a home folder for index and Steve. Car can be the same way. If I went into the car controller and I added another method, oops, I'm in the middle of debugging. If I added another method, public action result, and I called it this is the car controller, so I'm going to call it a car function. And I'm going to return view. This is saying I'm returning the view. I'm not sending anything to that view. All I'm doing is saying I'm associating this car function, this car method, with a specific view. So I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to click add view. I'm going to click OK. And it's created under the car folder over here, it's created a car.cshtml. This is the associated view with the car controller's car function. Hopefully that gives you a quick definition of how a controller and an associated view are created. I'll create one just real quickly, another one. New controller, I'm going to call it library. No, we'll call it books controller or book controller. I'm going to create a couple functions in here. Public action result. author, and I'll create another function, and it doesn't really matter the names of the functions I'm giving it. Font. I've just got 3 functions in this controller, and they all need to return view, because they have to return something because I specified this action result. Return view. I specified that these functions are returning something of type action result. And I can right click on each of these and I can add a view. I can click OK, and it created a brand new book folder, put the author one in there. And if I right click on this one, I have add view and click OK. Now I don't necessarily have to have a view associated with each function, but I just wanted to show the point that those functions can be associated with a view. So I'm going to look back at the book controller, and I can kind of see that I have some tooling that helps me. Hey, you don't have a view for this function. Would you like to declare a view? Well, certainly I like to declare a view. I'll click add, and now I have over here, I have one view for each of the methods in my book controller. These are the views. So if somebody said open up your car view, you know it's there. Or your book view or your font view, you know it's here. These are the views. Hopefully that helps you understand better between the association between your controller and your view.